The envelope wasn't white, it wasn't decorated with flowers. It didn't contain a handwritten letter, wedding advice, or even a congratulations card. It was thick, cream-colored, folded neatly, and stamped with the logo of Andrew's Hardware. My father carried it in the inside pocket of his suit jacket all day. I noticed him touching it before the ceremony, again during family photographs, again while we cut the cake, each time. His fingertips brushed the pocket as if he were making sure it was still there, waiting for the perfect moment. Can you imagine looking at your father on your wedding day and realizing he wasn't protecting a heartfelt speech? He was protecting a bill. My name is Hannah Andrews. I'm 32 years old. And the happiest day of my life almost became the most humiliating, not because someone objected to the marriage, not because anyone wore white, not because of family drama, but because my own father stood up in front of 140 guests, reached into his jacket, and tried to charge me for being his daughter. What he didn't know was that I'd brought an envelope too, and mine would change everything. If you've ever had someone make you feel like love had to be earned, or that kindness always came with a price, I'd love to know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy emotional family dramas with unforgettable twists and powerful endings, don't forget to subscribe to Sad Drama Stories. People think families fall apart because of one terrible moment. A betrayal, a fight, a secret. Mine fell apart one receipt at a time. The first receipt I remember wasn't really a receipt. It was Christmas morning. I was 10 years old. My little sister Megan sat cross-legged beside the tree, tearing wrapping paper into tiny pieces while Christmas music played softly in the background. Our living room looked warm, colored lights blinked on the tree, stockings hung above the fireplace. The smell of cinnamon rolls drifted from the kitchen. Everything looked like the Christmases you see in greeting cards. Until my father reached for his calculator. Not a camera, not another present. A calculator. He settled into his recliner with a yellow legal pad balanced across one knee. Every time Megan or I opened a gift, he wrote something down. Remote control truck, click, $38, winter coat, click, $64, board game, click, $22. He wasn't guessing, he had every receipt beside him. By the time we'd opened the last package, the legal pad was full of numbers. Dad tapped the calculator twice, smiled, then announced proudly, "Well, that Christmas cost us $412. Mom nodded without looking up from the coffee she'd been stirring. "As long as the girls appreciate it." Can you imagine being 10 years old and realizing your presents weren't gifts? They were expenses? Megan didn't notice. She hugged her new teddy bear. I looked at the yellow legal pad. Something about it made my stomach hurt. The bicycle wasn't a surprise anymore. It was a number. That Christmas changed me. The next birthday, when Mom asked what I wanted, I shrugged. "Nothing," she laughed. "Everyone wants something." Not me, because wanting something meant someone would remember what it cost. By middle school, I stopped asking altogether. New shoes, only when mine had holes. School supplies, only the cheapest notebooks. Birthday parties, I usually said I was busy. It felt easier to need less. Then came band camp. I was 12. Our music teacher thought I had talent. She handed me a brochure. "You should go." I spent 3 weeks practicing my speech, explaining why it mattered, how I could earn part of the money, how I'd babysit all summer. Dad read the brochure once, circled one number with a red pen. $650, then stuck it to the refrigerator with a magnet. "There," he said, "so nobody forgets." The paper stayed there for almost 2 years, fading in the sunlight, curling at the edges every breakfast. Every dinner, every glass of milk. I saw that number. $650, not a dream, a debt. Looking back, I realize something now. Most children grow up surrounded by photographs, memories. Art projects taped to refrigerators. Our refrigerator displayed invoices, costs, reminders, evidence. I didn't know it then, but somewhere inside the kitchen, hidden inside a blue notebook my mother thought I'd never find, she had been recording every dollar I'd ever cost them, since the day I was born. And one rainy afternoon, while searching for a pen, I accidentally opened it. The blue notebook wasn't hidden very well. It sat on the highest shelf inside the kitchen pantry, tucked behind an old recipe binder and a stack of expired coupon books. I only found it because Mom had asked me to grab a marker for labeling freezer bags instead. My hand brushed against something thick, hard, bound in blue leather. I pulled it down without thinking. There wasn't a title on the cover, no family name, no dates, just a notebook. Curious, I opened it. The first page contained neat columns. Date, description, amount. I smiled. Maybe it was a household budget. Then my eyes moved to the first entry. January 14, formula $46.80, the second entry. Diapers $19.25, then another. Doctor visit $82, another. Baby crib $240. I frowned. These weren't grocery expenses. They were baby expenses. Can you imagine slowly realizing someone had been calculating the cost of your existence? I flipped another page. The handwriting never changed. Every purchase was listed with remarkable precision. Children's medicine, school shoes, backpacks. Haircuts, winter jackets, birthday cakes, every dollar, every receipt, every year. Then, halfway down one page, I saw my own name. HANNAH written carefully in blue ink. Below it, a running total. I stopped breathing. The number already exceeded $60,000. I was only 13. What are you doing? Mom's voice came from behind me. I spun around so quickly the notebook slipped from my hands. It landed on the kitchen floor with a heavy thud. For several seconds, neither of us moved. She looked at the notebook, then at me. Without saying a word, she bent down, picked it up, held it against her chest. You shouldn't be looking through that, I swallowed. What is it? Her answer came so casually. It almost frightened me. Our records. Records, so we'll always know what we've spent. I waited, certain she'd explain. She didn't. Instead, she returned the notebook to the pantry as though nothing unusual had happened. Can you imagine hearing your childhood described as accounting records? That night, I couldn't sleep. The notebook stayed in my mind. Every number, every column, every total. I kept asking myself one question. Why would parents need to know exactly how much raising their child cost? The answer arrived 3 weeks later. Dad walked into the kitchen carrying a grocery receipt. He handed it to Mom. Without saying a word, she opened the blue notebook, added another line. Groceries, Hannah's share, $18.40, then closed it again, as though she'd done nothing unusual. I stared from across the room. Neither of them noticed, or perhaps they didn't care if I noticed anymore. From that day forward, I couldn't stop seeing it. Dad never threw receipts away. Mom filed every invoice, utility bills, medical statements, school fees, even birthday cards with cash inside were recorded, not as gifts, as expenses. By 15, I had developed a strange habit. Whenever I needed something, I calculated its price first, then asked myself, was I worth it? Most of the time, the answer became no. When friends bought new clothes, I wore mine another year. When classmates joined school trips, I stayed behind. When the senior class traveled to Washington, I told everyone I didn't like traveling. The truth? The trip cost $1,200. I already knew what Dad would say before I ever asked, so I never asked. Can you imagine becoming so afraid of costing money that you stopped allowing yourself to dream? Numbers became the language of our house. Not love, not encouragement, numbers. Ironically, they also became mine, except for a different reason. I fell in love with mathematics, accounting, patterns, balance sheets, not because they reminded me of home, because numbers, unlike people, didn't play favorites. If the math was correct, it was correct for everyone. Scholarships became my escape. I studied harder than anyone in my class, graduated first, earned a full academic scholarship to university. The day the acceptance letter arrived, Dad looked genuinely pleased, not because I had succeeded, because he'd saved tuition. Smart investment, he smiled. Finally paying off? Investment, there was that word again. I packed my bags 2 months later. Mom hugged me goodbye. Dad handed me a small envelope. Inside was a check for $200. My first thought was, how generous. Then he smiled. Don't spend it all. We're adding it to your file. I looked up. My file, so we remember. I folded the check, placed it back into the envelope, then quietly handed it back. I don't need it, he laughed. Pride won't pay your bills. Maybe not, but accepting it would have added another line to the notebook. And I was beginning to realize something. If my parents wanted to measure love in dollars, one day, those numbers were going to matter. More than they ever imagined, because while they spent years recording everything they gave me, I had quietly started recording something too. Every single dollar I would one day give back to them. The first payment wasn't large. Just $200. Dad called one Saturday morning during my second semester. The washing machine died. He sounded frustrated. We're short this month. I looked around my tiny dorm room. One bed, one desk. Second-hand furniture. Instant noodles stacked inside the cupboard. I checked my savings account. After rent, books, and groceries, I had just over $400. I can send $200. His voice immediately softened. You're a lifesaver. I smiled after hanging up. For the first time, it felt good to help. Can you imagine believing that generosity would finally make you feel like part of the family? I transferred the money before lunch. Then opened a spreadsheet on my laptop. Date, description, amount. Washer repair $200. I wasn't trying to keep score, not yet. I simply wanted to remember. The months passed, then another phone call. Mom needed dental work insurance wouldn't fully cover, $350. A few weeks later, Travis needed help replacing the tires on his truck. $500. Dad promised he'd repay me. He never did. Neither did I ask. Each transfer went into the spreadsheet. Every receipt, every confirmation email, every bank statement, carefully saved. Can you imagine growing up in a family that measured love with numbers? Only to realize you had learned the same language? By graduation, I had earned my degree in accounting, not just graduated, finished first in my class. The managing partner of one of the largest accounting firms in the state offered me a position before commencement. The salary was more money than I'd ever imagined earning. Dad smiled proudly during dinner. See? I told everyone you were a good investment. Investment. There it was again, always that word, never daughter, never pride, always return. The years that followed were busy, long hours, tax seasons, promotions, professional certifications. Eventually, I became a certified public accountant. Clients trusted me with businesses worth millions. Ironically, the girl who had been taught to fear every dollar became an expert at making them work. Meanwhile, the phone calls continued. Dad's roof started leaking. Mom needed a newer car, medical bills, property taxes, home insurance. Travis, the phone calls never stopped. They just became more expensive. At first, it was a broken washing machine, then a leaking roof. A few months later, Mom's car needed a new transmission. Every time my phone rang, I already knew how the conversation would end. Hannah, we hate asking, but there was always a but. Can you imagine becoming the first person your family calls? Not because they miss you, but because they know your bank account will answer before you do. I never argued. Not once, because somewhere deep inside, the little girl who'd stared at that blue notebook still believed something. Maybe, if I helped enough, one day, I'd finally feel like I belonged. The first transfer had been $200. The second, $350. The third, $500. By the end of my first year as a certified public accountant, the amounts had quietly grown. $2,000, $5,000, $10,000. Dad always promised. I'll pay you back, Mom always added. We'll make this right. Neither of them ever mentioned it again. Neither did I. Instead, every transfer disappeared into a spreadsheet I'd built years earlier. Date, purpose, amount, bank confirmation, receipt, notes, everything. Not because I expected repayment, because accountants learn one lesson before anything else. If money matters, documentation matters more. Can you imagine growing up inside a family that documented every dollar you cost? Without realizing you'd someday become even better at keeping records, work became my escape. Tax season, audits, corporate clients, long nights, coffee that tasted terrible, promotions that arrived faster than I'd expected. By 30, I was leading my own advisory team. Clients trusted me with companies worth millions. Ironically, the girl who'd once felt guilty asking for school supplies now advised CEOs on financial strategy. Numbers had stopped frightening me, people hadn't. One Saturday afternoon, Dad called again. Hannah, you busy? A little. I'll be quick. His voice sounded unusually cheerful. We found a lake cabin. It's perfect. Needs a little work. But the owner wants cash. I already knew what was coming. We're short. How much? There was a brief silence. Then, $25,000. I nearly dropped the phone. 25? It's an investment. You know real estate. It'll stay in the family. That sentence stayed with me. It'll stay in the family. I transferred the money 3 days later, not because I could easily afford it. Because I believed him. Family. The spreadsheet gained another line. Lake cabin down payment, $25,000 a year later. Travis wanted to start a landscaping business. Dad insisted it was a wonderful opportunity. He just needs equipment. He'll finally become responsible. The equipment cost $18,000. Guess who paid? The business lasted 8 months. The truck was repossessed. The equipment disappeared. No one ever mentioned the money again. Except my spreadsheet, every dollar remained exactly where I'd entered it. The total slowly climbed. $58,000, $92,000, $134,000. Then, one evening, while organizing old bank records, I opened a folder labeled Family Transfers. For the first time, I added everything together. The calculator finished almost instantly. $267,340. I stared at the screen. Twice, 3 times, the number didn't change. $267,340. Can you imagine realizing you'd quietly given away more money than your parents claimed it had cost to raise you? I leaned back in my chair, not angry, just surprised. Somewhere over the years, the little girl afraid to ask for a birthday present had become the person financing everyone else's dreams. A week later, I met Ethan. Not in an accounting office, not at work, in the grocery store. I reached for the last carton of oat milk. He reached for it at exactly the same moment. We both laughed. "You take it," he smiled. "No, you were here first." It was such a tiny moment, yet somehow, it felt completely different from every relationship I'd ever known. He didn't ask what I earned, didn't ask where I lived, didn't ask what kind of car I drove. Instead, he asked, "What book are you reading?" Nobody had ever opened a conversation with me that way. Coffee turned into dinner, dinner became weekend hikes, hikes became holidays. Then one evening, standing beside the lake at sunset, he knelt on one knee. "Hannah, I don't care how much money you have. I only care whether you'll spend your life with me." I laughed through tears because for the first time, someone wasn't calculating my value, they were simply choosing me. I said yes. When Dad heard the news, he smiled, then asked the first question that should have warned me. "So, who's paying for the wedding? Who's paying for the wedding?" For a moment, I thought Dad was joking. Ethan and I had been engaged for less than 5 minutes. My ring still felt unfamiliar on my hand. The excitement hadn't even settled, and somehow, the conversation had already become about money. Can you imagine sharing the happiest news of your life, only to have someone immediately ask about the bill? "We are," I answered. Ethan smiled beside me. "We've been saving for it." Dad nodded slowly. "Good, I just wanted to make sure." That was it. No congratulations, no hug, no "I'm proud of you," just financial clarification. I should have recognized the pattern. Instead, I convinced myself weddings made everyone stressed. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this was finally going to feel like a family celebration. I couldn't have been more wrong. Planning began 6 months later. Ethan's parents insisted on helping, not because we needed the money, because they wanted to be part of it. His mother spent weekends visiting florists with me. His father volunteered to build the wooden welcome sign by hand. Neither of them ever asked what anything cost. Only, "What would make you happy?" The question felt almost unfamiliar. Can you imagine reaching your 30s before someone asked what you wanted, instead of what you could provide? Meanwhile, my parents became unusually interested. Mom wanted the guest list. Dad wanted the venue details. Travis kept asking whether the reception included an open bar. For once, nobody asked me for money. I actually began believing maybe they'd changed. Then came the seating chart. Our wedding planner spread a large diagram across the conference table. Round tables, 8 guests each, family near the front, friends near the dance floor, everything carefully arranged. She smiled. "Any special requests?" Before I could answer, Mom spoke. "Our side should be closest to the head table." "Of course." The planner made a note, then asked, "And your fiancé's parents?" Mom answered again. "They can sit behind us." I looked up. "Actually, I'd like Ethan's parents beside us." The room became quiet. Dad frowned. "But we're your parents." "I know, and they've treated me like family from the day we met." Nobody spoke. The planner pretended to reorganize papers. Mom forced a smile. "Whatever you think is best." Her voice sounded pleasant. Her eyes didn't. Can you imagine realizing someone wasn't upset about where they were sitting? They were upset about losing first place? A week later, I received an email from the venue. The final invoice. Everything had been paid, every flower, every meal, every musician, every chair, paid in full. I smiled. One less thing to worry about. That evening, Dad called. "So, how much did everything cost?" I laughed. "You don't need to worry. I'm just curious." "It's handled." Another pause, then. "You should keep all the receipts." The sentence made my stomach tighten. "Why, you never know. It's good to have records." Records, that word again. Always records, always numbers, never memories, never joy, just documentation. After hanging up, I opened my laptop. Almost without thinking, I updated my own spreadsheet. Every transfer I'd ever made, every receipt, every wire confirmation, every canceled check, every loan that had quietly become a gift. The total remained exactly the same, $267,340. I stared at it for a long time, then created a PDF, printed 2 copies, placed one inside a cream-colored envelope. The other went into my office safe. I wasn't planning anything, not really. Old habits simply die hard, especially for accountants. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and clear. The ballroom overlooked a quiet lake. White roses lined the aisle. Soft piano music echoed through the room. Guests laughed. Children chased each other across the gardens. Everything looked exactly the way Ethan and I had imagined. His father hugged me before the ceremony. "You already feel like our daughter?" 3 simple words. They nearly made me cry because they cost nothing, yet meant everything. The ceremony was perfect. I laughed. I cried. I promised forever to the only person who had ever loved me. Without calculating the price, when the applause ended, I believed the hardest part of the day was over. During dinner, Dad stood up, tapped his champagne glass with a fork. Guests smiled. Finally, a father of the bride's speech. I reached for Ethan's hand beneath the table. Dad reached into his jacket, pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope. The same one he'd carried all day. Then, instead of raising a glass, he walked straight toward me, placed the envelope on my dinner plate, and quietly said, "This seemed like the appropriate day to settle your account." The ballroom fell silent. Not because my father had begun his speech, because he hadn't. Instead, he placed the cream-colored envelope directly on my dinner plate. It rested beside my untouched slice of wedding cake. The room waited. Someone laughed nervously. Thinking it was part of a joke, I smiled politely. "What's this?" Dad folded his hands behind his back. "Open it." Can you imagine sitting at your own wedding reception, surrounded by everyone you love, and suddenly feeling like you were about to fail an exam? I carefully broke the seal. Inside, there wasn't a letter, there wasn't a family photograph, there wasn't even a congratulations card. There was an invoice, professionally printed, 3 pages long. Across the top in bold letters were the words, "Account balance." Below it, hundreds of line items: hospital bills, baby formula, school clothes, Christmas presents, birthday parties, summer camp, dentist appointments, piano lessons I'd quit after 6 months. Even the braces I'd worn in high school. Every expense listed, every receipt totaled at the very bottom. One final figure. Total due $240,184.16. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything. The music disappeared. The conversations vanished. Even my heartbeat seemed distant. I simply stared at the number. Can you imagine discovering your parents had turned your childhood into an unpaid invoice? Dad finally spoke. His voice echoed through the ballroom microphone. "I've always believed children should appreciate what their parents sacrifice." A few guests chuckled politely, thinking he was building toward something heartfelt. He wasn't. "So today, as you begin your new life, I think it's only fair that you begin settling your debt." Complete silence. No laughter, no applause, nothing. I slowly looked around the room. My college friends stared in disbelief. My coworkers exchanged confused glances. Ethan's parents looked horrified. His mother quietly covered her mouth with both hands. Even the wedding planner had stopped moving. Dad smiled confidently, as though he'd just delivered profound wisdom. "I don't expect it all today," he laughed. "I'm not unreasonable." A A payment plan is fine. Someone at the back gasped. Can you imagine humiliating your daughter and believing everyone would agree with you? I looked toward Mom. She wasn't surprised, not even a little. Instead, she nodded. We've kept records since the day you were born. It's only fair. Only fair. Those words hurt more than the invoice itself, because they meant this wasn't spontaneous. They had planned it, printed it, brought it to my wedding, knowing exactly when they'd present it. Ethan reached for my hand beneath the table. You don't have to answer, he whispered. I squeezed his fingers gently, then looked back at my father. You've been keeping records my whole life, he smiled proudly. Every dollar. So there's no confusion. I slowly nodded. I see. For the first time all evening, I wasn't angry, I was calm, very calm. The kind of calm that arrives when something finally makes perfect sense. I reached beneath my chair, picked up the small cream-colored envelope I'd placed there that morning. No one else had noticed it, not even Ethan. I hadn't planned to use it. Honestly, I'd almost forgotten it was there. I placed it quietly on the table beside Dad's invoice. His smile faded slightly. What's that? My records. A few guests looked between the two envelopes. Confused, Dad laughed again. What records? I answered softly. The same kind you taught me to keep. His expression changed, only slightly, just enough for me to notice. I stood slowly, picked up the microphone. Not because I wanted revenge, because everyone in that room deserved the truth, including me. I became a certified public accountant, because numbers never lie. Several guests smiled politely, still unsure where this was going. I continued, my father says I owe him $240,000 for raising me. I lifted his invoice, held it high enough for everyone to see. I'd like to thank him. A few people actually applauded. Dad grinned, certain he'd already won. Then, I opened my own envelope, removed a neatly bound report. 112 pages, every page tabbed, every page numbered, every transfer documented. I looked directly into my father's eyes, then said the one sentence he never imagined hearing. I kept records too. The ballroom became so quiet, you could hear the air conditioner humming above the dance floor. I slowly turned to the first page, then read aloud. The first transfer, $200 for your washing machine. The first transfer, $200 for your washing machine. No one moved. No one reached for a drink. No one even picked up a fork. 140 wedding guests sat frozen, watching a father and daughter compare ledgers instead of exchanging a toast. I turned the page. April 12th, $350. Mom's dental procedure. Another page. August 3rd, $500. New tires for Travis. Another. Property taxes, $4,860. Another. Medical bills, $7,200. Another. Lake cabin down payment, $25,000. Every number echoed through the ballroom. Every page sounded heavier than the last. Can you imagine realizing the child you'd spent decades treating like an expense had quietly become the person financing your life? My father's smile slowly disappeared. Mom's hands began trembling. Travis shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I continued reading. Not dramatically, not angrily, just accurately, because numbers don't need emotion, they speak for themselves. This report contains every transfer, every canceled check, every wire confirmation, and every bank statement from the past 14 years. I placed the thick binder on the head table. It has also been reviewed and verified by my accounting firm. Several guests leaned forward. Dad cleared his throat. Hannah, this isn't necessary. I looked at him calmly. Neither was your invoice. The room became silent again. Can you imagine trying to embarrass someone publicly, only to discover they came prepared with the truth? I picked up the final page. The total amount I've transferred to our family is $267,340. I paused, then smiled politely. That's $27,155. More than the debt you've claimed I owe. A murmur spread across the ballroom. Someone quietly whispered, "Oh my God." I looked directly at my father. So, using your own accounting method, it appears you actually owe me. No one laughed, no one applauded. The silence itself became the loudest sound in the room. Dad stared at the binder, his lips moved. No words came out. For the first time in my entire life, he didn't have an answer. Mom finally stood. Hannah, that's different. I tilted my head. How? She hesitated. Parents aren't supposed to repay their children. I nodded slowly. I agree, then looked around the room. And children aren't supposed to repay their parents for loving them. A woman near the back quietly wiped away tears. Even the photographer lowered his camera. Some moments deserved witnesses, not photographs. Dad tried one last time. We sacrificed everything for you, I smiled sadly. No, you invested in me. Those were your words. You called college an investment. You called groceries expenses. You called Christmas a cost. I gently placed his invoice back inside its envelope. You taught me that every relationship should be balanced. I simply balanced the books. Can you imagine spending your whole life teaching someone to measure love with money, only to lose by your own formula? Dad slowly sat down. His shoulders looked smaller than they had an hour earlier. Across the table, Ethan stood. He wrapped one arm around my shoulders, then looked at my parents. I've known Hannah for 4 years. In that time, I've never heard her complain about either of you, not once. But I've watched her send money without hesitation. I've watched her cancel vacations to help your family. I've watched her work 80-hour weeks because someone always needed something. He looked at my father. And today, you handed the kindest woman I've ever known an invoice. His voice never rose. It didn't need to. Truth rarely does. Ethan's father quietly stood next. Then his mother, without saying a word. They walked over to me. His father pulled me into a hug, a real one, the kind that asks for nothing. We're proud to call you family. 3 simple sentences, no receipt attached. No conditions, no balance due. At that moment, I realized something I'd never understood before. Family isn't the people who keep score, it's the people who never think to start counting. Dad reached for the microphone one final time. His hands shook. Hannah, He looked around the ballroom, at the guests, at the binder, at the invoice still lying on the table, then slowly lowered the microphone again because for the first time, there was nothing left to calculate. Only something he had never learned how to give. An apology for the first time in my life. My father had one, he just didn't know how to say it. He stood behind the microphone, looked down at the invoice. Then at the thick binder resting beside it, 2 stacks of paper. One measured the cost of raising a child, the other measured the cost of loving parents who never stopped asking. Neither belonged at a wedding. Can you imagine realizing? The most expensive thing in the room wasn't the reception. It was everything that had never been said. Dad slowly folded the invoice. His hands trembled when he finally spoke. His voice sounded nothing like the confident man who had walked to the microphone a few minutes earlier. I thought, he swallowed hard, I thought teaching responsibility meant showing children what things cost. He looked at me. I didn't realize I was teaching you that my love had a price. The ballroom remained silent. No one interrupted, no one looked away. Mom quietly stood beside him. Tears rolled down her face. I wrote those notebooks, she whispered. I kept every receipt. I told myself I was just being organized. She closed her eyes. But somewhere, I stopped recording expenses and started recording your worth. The sentence broke something inside the room. Several guests lowered their heads. Even Travis looked away. Can you imagine spending years believing numbers protected your family, only to discover they quietly destroyed it? Mom turned toward me. I never asked how those notebooks made you feel. You were just a little girl, and I made you believe you had to earn being loved. She covered her face. I'm so sorry, not the kind of apology people give to end an argument. The kind that comes when denial finally runs out. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Travis slowly stood. He looked more nervous than I'd ever seen him. I owe you one too, he forced a weak smile. I always knew, whenever I got into trouble, Dad called you. I never asked where the money came from. I just expected it. He shook his head. I'm ashamed of that. I looked at all 3 of them, the little girl inside me, the one who counted every Christmas gift, the one who stared at the blue notebook, the one who stopped asking for school trips because she didn't want another number written beside her name. She had waited decades for this moment. She thought it would feel like victory. It didn't, it felt like peace. I walked toward my father, picked up his invoice, looked at it one last time, then quietly tore it in half once, then again. Then again, small pieces of paper drifted onto the white tablecloth. I don't owe you for raising me, I smiled gently. That was never my debt. Then I picked up my own binder, 112 pages. 14 years of bank records, receipts, wire transfers, canceled checks. I closed it carefully. I won't send you an invoice either, Dad looked confused. Why not? Because I refuse to let money become the language of this family anymore. Can you imagine breaking a cycle? Not by winning, but by refusing to keep playing the same game? Ethan quietly slipped his hand into mine. His father smiled. His mother wiped away another tear. The wedding planner finally exhaled. Even the musicians looked relieved. Then Ethan raised his champagne glass. I think my wife deserves the first real toast of tonight. Laughter spread softly across the ballroom, gentle, honest, healing. Everyone lifted their glasses. Ethan looked directly at me. To Hannah, the woman who spent her whole life proving her value, before realizing she never had to. The room erupted into applause, not because someone had won, because everyone had just witnessed something far more important, a family choosing truth. Months later, Mom mailed me a package. Inside was the old blue notebook, the one she'd kept since the day I was born. Tucked inside the front cover was a handwritten note. For years, this book recorded what you cost us. Today, I finally understand something. You were never an expense. You were our greatest blessing. I'm sorry it took me so long to learn the difference. I never added another number to my spreadsheet. I archived it, closed the file, and never opened it again because some accounts don't need balancing, they need forgiving. A year later, Ethan and I welcomed our first daughter. When we brought her home, friends asked whether we'd started a college savings account. We have, I smiled. Then they joked, so are you keeping track of everything she costs? I looked down at my little girl sleeping peacefully in my arms, then answered with the only lesson worth passing on. No, I'm keeping track of every moment I get to love her, because children aren't investments. They're not invoices. They're not debts waiting to be collected. They're gifts, and gifts never come with a balance due. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been made to feel like love had to be earned, or that everything someone did for you came with a hidden price? Share your story in the comments. Your words might help someone else break the same cycle. And if you enjoy emotional family dramas, powerful life lessons, quiet strength, and unforgettable endings where healing matters more than revenge, don't forget to subscribe to Sad Drama Stories. Thank you for watching, and remember, the greatest parents never keep receipts, they keep memories.